That's a good transition, to MAGA and kind of the reaction that we've seen so far. By far the most outspoken voice over the weekend, Tucker Carlson, who took the stage in enemy territory, or maybe not, actually we can discuss, at the Turning Point USA conference, where it's full of the MAGA faithful. And the conference itself was raucous, both on the Epstein question. There was a debate between Dave Smith and Josh Hammer on the question of Israel. Both of them were actually getting booed and celebrated at the same time. Israel and Epstein are actually just tearing up the entire, at least like young MAGA faithful, which is very interesting. So let's take a listen here to Tucker Carlson's comments at the TPUSA event on Jeffrey Epstein. Let's take a listen.
And so the real question is not, was Jeffrey Epstein a weirdo who was abusing girls? Yes, we can answer that. The real question is, why was he doing this, on whose behalf, and where did the money come from? And those are the questions that need to be answered. And I think it's entirely fair to ask them. And it's not adequate to say anyone who asked them is somehow desecrating the memory of little girls who died in Texas. I'm not going to put up with that answer. I don't care who gives that answer. That is not acceptable. And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working? It's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel, because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There is nothing wrong with saying that. There is nothing hateful about saying that. There's nothing anti-Semitic about saying that. There's nothing even anti-Israel about saying that. And you have a right to expect that your government will not act against your interests, and you have a right to demand that foreign governments not be allowed to act against your interests. People feel like they can't just say, like, what the hell is this? You have the former Israeli prime minister living in your house. You have had all this contact with the foreign government. Were you working on behalf of Mossad? Were you running a blackmail operation on behalf of a foreign government? By the way, every single person in Washington, D.C. thinks that. I've never met anyone who doesn't think that.
Every single person, I mean, privately, they probably do admit it. People are too afraid to actually say it out loud. But that was from Tucker. Obviously, he's gotten a huge reaction. He's already being denounced by the Israeli Minister for Diaspora Affairs, who is an open letter to Charlie Kirk about platforming anti-Semitism like this. The former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, this morning came out and said Israel's never worked with Jeffrey Epstein, he never worked with Mossad, and he went after Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk as well. Let's put this up there on the screen. Also from Elon Musk, who originally made this accusation, saying here, quote, seriously, he said Epstein half a dozen times, this is reacting to the original Truth Social post, half a dozen times while telling everyone to stop talking about Epstein, just release the files as promised. Actually it just occurred to me, what if all of this was an effort to try and shut down the Elon conversation, which ended up just being a Streisand effect for all of that, to try and get ahead or responding? That actually would make a little bit of political sense.
I think that's probably part of it too, for sure. I mean, it's really interesting, the Israel piece and what you're talking about, how it's like tearing apart young MAGA in particular, the young right in particular. And at the same time, it's tearing apart the Democratic Party. And I mean, it makes sense in a way, because Israel sort of exposes like the lies and hypocrisy of both major parties' ideology. So if Trump is positioning himself as America first and America's interests first, obviously, you have this glaring Israel exception, which just exposes the lie of whether or not his foreign policy is actually about serving the interests of the American people. And you have ancillary problems with like cancel culture and things like that. So for the right, there's a massive tension there where it exposes the hypocrisies of the sort of like ruling elite's ideology. And obviously on the left with the Democratic Party, these are supposed to be people who care about human rights and, humanitarianism, and they want to be the good guys in the world, et cetera. And it's like, you are funding and supporting a genocide. So what's going on there? So, I guess it's would have been hard to predict that Israel would have been the issue that would create these massive fault lines and fissures within both of these coalitions. But when you think it through, it actually makes perfect sense why this is unfolding the way that it ultimately
I totally
is.
agree. I mean, it's part of the reason we get to work together well on this issue, right? I mean, it's like come at it from different angles. I'm not sitting here talking about humanitarianism anywhere. I'm just like, hey, I really want my own country to function on its own terms. Is that too much to ask? I want for my foreign policy to benefit me as a citizen and the rest of our citizens. I don't think it's so much, to ask of somebody. Apparently it is, even when somebody runs on the slogan of America First here. I'm only happy to see that so many young Republicans have changed so much on the issue. And make no mistake, as many of these boomers who are, praying at these Kufi conferences to the survival of Israel, who are like, I would die before any Israeli dies, there are plenty of younger Republicans out there, people who grew up on Tucker or any of these podcasts, who have a very different view on foreign affairs, who actually believe in America First, like as a principle, who are furious. And this is where the Epstein thing goes broader, because it's like you said about cancel culture. More recently, the Epstein issue is now being used by kind of Zionist forces as a cancel culture issue. They're like, oh, look at these conspiracy theorists. We need to shut down this. I mean, Netanyahu, maybe we can cover this tomorrow, in his interview with Mark Levin, said that the 8th front war for Israel is now disinformation in the United States of America. And he's like, we must attack it on all fronts. They're being pretty open about all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, let's go to the cabinet member for diaspora. It's like, bro, you are trying to tell Charlie Kirk how to run the TPUSA event. You're trying to tell him, a minister of a foreign government, trying to tell him how to run a TPUSA internal GOP type event. That's the level of comfort that they have in meddling and kind of lecturing our own affairs. Why? Because they've gotten away with it for years, from APAC to BDS laws that are on the books. It's all just too much, I hope, for a lot of people.
But I guarantee that Charlie Kirk has some exposure here, though, because I'm sure that some of his donors are, significant, committed, ideological Zionists.
It's not even a question. It's obvious. They absolutely do.
And so Laura Loomer has been waging war against Charlie Kirk for daring to platform such an odious character as Dave Smith.
Yeah.
Or, Tucker, she's actually sharing the clip of Dave from our show, where he's critical of Trump, saying,
Laura.
this is he's not pro-Trump, he's anti-Trump, et cetera. And she's also making that point of, your donors were promised one thing, and here you are platforming these, anti-Israel voices. So, there's a war that's being waged here at this point on the specific issue of Israel. Now, again, with Tucker and with many others, the criticism is directly of Israel. There's very light touch where Trump himself is concerned. So that is still, if you want to be in good graces in MAGA world, if you want to continue to have access to Trump, et cetera, obviously that's still the approach that is taken there. But it was pretty interesting to see these fissures that have opened up, at TPUSA. And Charlie Kirk, I actually just saw this morning a report that Trump had called him and said, you need to stop criticizing Pam Bondi in particular, because like I said, that was the kind of go-to of okay, well, how are we going to handle this without criticizing Trump? We'll make her the scapegoat, and now that has been taken off the table.
If I were Charlie, here's what I would tell my donors. My job is to assemble the young right and to kind of get them excited. We cannot do that in an environment where, here we have Pew Research in March, overall opinion of Israel, Republicans under 50% unfavorable. 50% unfavorable. That was in March of 2025. Pew, same survey. Do you have confidence in Netanyahu to do the right thing? 32% for in terms of confidence for young Republicans. This is under 50. I would actually love to see a poll of under 35. Is Israel an ally, friendly, unfriendly, or an enemy of the United States? 20% lower ally rating for the GOP under 45 compared to GOP 65 plus. Quinnipiac, is the U.S. too supportive of Israel? Only 15% of Republicans said that they are, but massively driven at that point by the under 50 category. Let's also remember younger people skewed a lot more Republican. In some surveys I've seen, they actually voted more Republican, specifically young men, than either at a majority or at any time than ever before. So you cannot say that this is a nothing coalition, or at least part of your overall voter base and perhaps, future of the entire country. And that's part of why if TPUSA is to be an honest event, then they have to have at least some representation of this view. Let's go ahead and put B3. We'll go ahead and play this. This was very interesting. And this, again, look, for all the influencer talk and all of that, this is just a dude who attended the event. Here's what he had to say about the Epstein thing.
We need to enforce the laws of this country. And, like you said, Steve, there's no better question than who rules America. It's not the people. So we need to obviously have the declassification of the
You don't
Epstein
think
files.
Donald Trump is president? You would tell Donald Trump in the Oval Office that you think there's an open question with him as commander-in-chief and doing all he's doing. You would actually tell Trump you don't know, you question who rules this country?
I definitely would, because it's a blackmail ring, and anybody who wouldn't is not paying attention. Simply put, Epstein himself said that he was best friends on the stand with Donald Trump. So anybody who thought that these files were going to get just declassified because we pressured him enough or you voted harder enough is just lying to yourself, frankly.
Do you agree with a special prosecutor has to be an independent special prosecutor has to take over? Do you believe that DOJ and FBI right now, with the guys who we're all close to, Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, do you think they have any credibility left to pursue this?
No, and I'll tell you exactly why, Steve, because in 2016, we trusted the plan with Trump. But now Trump has become the deep state. The exact thing we voted him in.
Why do you say he's become the deep state?
What is more deep state than covering up for pedophiles? Why would you go to that island? Why? Tell me, why would you go to that island? Why would you go on the plane?
Interesting. Interesting indeed. There's no better representation of modern right-wing America than a guy pressing a Latino young male in a suit at a TPUSA conference, pressing Steve Bannon, calling out Donald Trump for being a part of the deep state.
Well,
that is the new Republican coalition.
Steve Bannon has some things to answer for as well.
Because that is very weird. I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, he had his own associations and then did this he's
got 15 hours of
interview with Epstein that's never been released. So Steve Bannon, release the files, release the tapes, buddy.
Totally
Let's see what you got there. I suspect where a lot of this goes ultimately, and you can kind of hear it there in what that individual was saying. I suspect it goes to a place of nihilism. And you kind of hear this from the podcast bros too. Like you said, new boss, same as the old boss. The sense he says this thing about like, oh, you can't vote hard enough to get a different outcome, et cetera. And I saw the same thing happen on the left after you had first the betrayal of Obama, then you have the hope of Bernie Sanders, then you have Bernie Sanders defeated and, a sort of sense of a rigged system stacked against you in 2016, 2020. Also a sense that Bernie, in some senses, there was like a sense of betrayal around the way he conducted himself and the friendliness towards Biden, et cetera. And a lot of that morphed into a nihilism of just like, nothing matters, nothing can change, I can't have any impact, everyone's always going to betray you. And I suspect that some of this energy, that's exactly where it goes towards.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think with the MAGA influencer world, they're going to get back on board with Trump. He's going to do some crazy shit in the next couple weeks, and they're going to be out there. They're going to be defending him. They're going to find some way, whether it's Alex Jones, we'll play this in a little bit, out there saying like, oh, it's the Democrats' fault. They probably rigged the Epstein files to delete anything that looks bad for them and just like, invent things that look bad for Trump. And so it makes sense that Trump wouldn't release them. They'll come up with some shit to get back on board. I think the podcast bros will just become more sort of like, nihilistic, nothing matters, you can't vote your way out of it. Tim Dillon did a whole bit about like, you've just got to pick the pedo that, is pro-business or whatever. That was his take on it. And, for independents, I think this will contribute to already a sense of this isn't really what I wanted in this administration. This is not the guy that I thought he was. He's not, the truth teller. He's not delivering on an economic front for me the way that I wanted. And just a general sense of sort of decline and disappointment is how I would sort the various buckets of how this will work out.
But that's a really sad story, don't you think? I mean, what you're talking about is what led to Bernie Bros. Bernie Bros got burned twice, 2016, 2020, and then became Trump Bros. Now, if you've been burned 4 times in a row, who are you likely to become in terms of your politics? You're going to start getting pretty angry.
Yeah.
That's what led to, a lot of radicalization for a lot of people. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, in some ways, I almost welcome it at this point because, people need to see just exactly how disgusting so many of these politicians are. I can even say this on a personal level. I know some of the people who are involved, in the government and all this, and then just to watch it, twist and turn into something that, it's not even about promises from a TV screen. I'm talking about years of conversation and all these other things about what a future government looks like and the plan and all that. And then you come out with this shit and you're like, oh, this is a tough pill to swallow. It makes you want to become a Zoran Mamdani supporter, or it makes you makes you want to like really look at some radical shit now in the future. That's just me personally, and I'm doing okay. Now, if you add on top of that somebody who you voted for Obama about bailouts and then got burned and voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Trump or maybe Biden in 2020, maybe you sat out that vote. 2024, you're disgusted by Biden, you come in and you vote for Trump again. Now you're like 60 years old. What are you gonna think? At that point. And you're looking at the Medicaid situation, or you're starting to get worried about the country. You take my generation, our generation, the millennial ones. I was just telling you this morning, 38 years old is now the average price for a first-time home buyer in America. You have no stake in the country now at this point.
Yeah.
I'd have to do the math. If you're 38 years old, how many presidential elections have you voted in? So that's 20 years of being an eligible voter. So maybe 3 or 4 presidential elections if you're lucky. I mean, if you vote 3 or 4 times and your life actually gets shittier every single time, what path is that going to lead you behind? It doesn't take a genius, to figure this stuff out.
Well, I want to pick up on that Zoran point and pull that thread a little bit, because I think it's interesting. Because I was saying before, I couldn't have predicted it, but it makes perfect sense that Israel ends up being this key dividing issue in both the Republican coalition and inside of the Democratic coalition. The Democrats are further along in that, you have the Democratic base is like 80% now at this point. Like, we've got to stop this relation. This is insane. It's a genocide. We've got to stop. And Zoran just had this really significant victory in the city of New York, which is an incredible, it is actually an earth-shattering kind of a thing. That he could win as an avowed anti-Zionist in New York City is really wild. I think, as I was telling you before, I think in 2028, you're going to have this divide. It's going to be central. And Israel stands in as a question of, are you your own person? Do you have principles? Or are you just basically controlled?
Yes.
And I think it stands in for the same thing on the right.
Yes.
And so I do think that there is a risk coalitionally for, people who have been, who are young, who are on the right. If you do end up with a Democratic candidate who is anti-Zionist and more avowed and has a different position on this, I do actually think it could be a coalitional problem for the young right, as this issue has been so central as a stand-in for, are you a decent person with some basic commitment and principles and can stand on your own? And the reason I say that is, you see the way Schultz reacted to Mamdani, where he was had some respect for him because of taking that position. It really struck me that the one thing Rogan knew about him was that moment on the debate stage where he's like, I'm staying here in New York. Y'all can go to Israel if you want, and really stood his ground on that particular issue. And so I do think that, surprisingly, and I've said many times, I don't think this is the way people vote, and I don't know how central foreign policy is. I actually do think that this issue has become so divisive and has become such a litmus test that it is shaping politics on both the left and the right in a really profound way.
Well, you said something important there. You call it a foreign policy issue. It's not a foreign policy issue. Now
That's
it's a domestic policy issue. Now it's about whether you care more about a foreign country than you care
And it's about
your own.
character.
And it's about character.
Yeah.
So, you can come at it from a variety of different issues. But, I do predict that this will be a problem. Here's Shane Gillis talking about the Trump and Epstein files release. Let's take a listen.
That's insane that they're just being like, no, everything was cool, above board, don't worry.
It's like Trump dog.
Yeah.
It's tough not to fucking point some fingers.
Huge
Because
question
you got
mark.
killed while you were president.
Yeah.
And you were there. There's so many photos of them chilling.
Allegedly hung with his staff.
I know.
Allegedly hung with his staff.
The cope on Trump's innocent. The cope is fucking pretty intense. Somebody brought it up at a meeting and Trump was like, are you guys still talking about Epstein? It's like, that's crazy. There's so much other stuff going on. I can't believe you're bringing up Epstein. Are you serious? God, get a life. You guys are obsessed with this shit. What the fuck? No one even cares. Yeah, it's so long ago. The guy killed himself and he was innocent. What the hell?
They're probably all sexually blackmailed.
So there we go, checking in on Shane Gillis and Matt McCusker, friend of the show, by the way. We love Matt over here. But listen, it's not going away. That's going to be there. I haven't heard. Tim Dillon has weighed in. The Flagrant podcast has weighed in. I don't know if Theo has yet. I'm sure there'll be something good coming. Hopefully we see something interesting from Joe as well, all on the issue. So I think that's the trifecta, right, in terms of, I'm trying to do the math. I can't think of any other large podcast that Trump went on. I guess the Nelk
Boys.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize.
Have we gotten there?
No, we
sit
still
down
haven't.
with Bibi yet?
Still haven't gotten there.
Interesting.
There, Bibi, sit down. I've been checking for it. I'm waiting on you. Steiny, where are you, man? Well, what's happening? I still can't believe that happened. But yeah, I'm trying to think. Outside of Nelk, maybe Barstool. I think he went on Bussin', which I don't know if it's with Barstool anymore.
Well,
They're more. It's more
Portnoy's
like
very
sports.
pro-Israel, isn't he?
Yeah, but I'm saying the podcast he went on was not. I think they left Barstool, but it's more sports related, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
if
but I mean, I
gonna
think
weigh in on
Portnoy
that.
does fit in that sphere, though, of like the bro podcaster.
Yeah, no,
and
he
he's definitely
does.
on the other side.
Well, the
of
thing
being
is,
very
Portnoy is very
pro-Israel.
pro-Israel, so
Yeah.
that's part of the problem. He's been attacking actually Andrew Schultz publicly.
Saw that and going
about
back
the
and forth.
Mamdani thing, which is pretty funny. But I mean, I guess that's more of a separate issue. But if you guys want to see the cope,
It's connected.
if you guys all want to see the cope, here's Alex Jones actually giving Trump some of the benefit of the doubt on the issue.
This is a giant fiasco. I'm trying to call balls and strikes. I'm trying to look at every angle of this and understand what's happening, understand why the Trump administration did a 180 the last few months, and particularly the last week, and did this, and then blames loyal supporters who support the overall agenda as being traitorous for doing this. Now, we all know what triggered this. It was Elon 2 months ago saying, look, Trump's in the list, and that big break up there, and then Trump wants it closed, he wants it shut down, which looks extremely incriminating. But from all of my deep research, never saw Trump involved in any illegal activity with Jeffrey Epstein. I didn't even think about the fact, I'm like, oh yeah, if they've had the list and they've had the files for years, the Democrats would take stuff out and destroy it. Well, that's obvious. But they would leave in and twist and put in what they wanted. They have a long history of false documents, reports, Crossfire Hurricane, the list goes on and on. And this is not going away. It's only blown up 10 times bigger. It's out of control. And this was so obvious a week ago. People said, oh, you're being a traitor, saying it's going to be a big issue. No, I'm seasoned, I'm informed, I'm involved, I know what's going on.
Got it, Alex.
Seasoned.
Really getting to the bottom of it. Here we also have Scott Adams. We could put this up there on the screen. He says, must be juicy and dangerous stuff in those files, but I don't feel the need to be a backseat driver on this topic. For leaders, I trust that it's time to let it go. They want what is best for America, and they have their reasons. I don't need to check their work.
Not Nicole.
I mean,
when you're definitely not Nicole.
That is such let's just weigh on that for a second, because this is very predominant amongst MAGA. During Iran and now during this, it's about trusting the plan. It's about trusting Donald Trump. Even JD was like, Trump has earned the trust on this issue, and it's like, no, he's not. And by the way, if we look at it, the neocons did not trust Trump. Whenever Trump was going in the diplomatic direction, they were like, Steve Witkoff is a Qatari asset, and Trump is betraying Israel and all that. But then the moment, that he's going in their direction, they're like, oh, you got to sit down and you got to trust Trump. This is part of the reason why, if you're not willing to actually just be honest and be genuinely critical, you're going to get nowhere in a political movement. You got to kick up a fuss and actually kick some shit around. But this whole you got to trust and all that, it's cultish behavior. I mean, how did it work out for the leftists who trusted Obama? I mean, if Ryan were here, I'd love to talk to him about that. That was part of the pushback they would always get. Is there what, you guys don't trust us? And Ryan and them would be like, no, we don't trust you on bank bailouts or any of this other stuff. After a while, it's like, fool me once, fool me twice, then it's on me. That's really what's happened at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
well, leftists didn't really exist at that point in America,
but, there was a lot
the
of
liberals.
I
mean, I was at MSNBC at the time, and that was the ethos.
Yeah.
Because if Obama's doing it,
it's good.
Must be good.
Right.
And there were very few who actually remained principled during that time period and would say, no, I said I was against drone wars during the Bush administration. I'm still against drone wars, I just went on the Alex Jones thing. I guess apparently he cried, he puked.
Yes.
And then he realized the truth, which is this is actually all the Democrats' fault. He's just trying to call balls and strikes here. Yeah. He's never seen, and this will be a good segue into the next, he's never seen any evidence that Trump had any involvement. So it can't be that. Put that out of your mind, Saagar and Teddy. Must be the Democrats' fault, even though Epstein killed himself while Trump was president the first time. Oh, isn't that interesting? We've got one more for you here. We didn't put up cat turd yet, did we?
Yes, no, we did not.
We've got a cat turd we can throw up on the screen. Good night, everyone. My advice is to mute or block all negative black pill accounts. It's amazing how successful the first 6 months of the Trump administration has been. Don't let these sourpuss chronic complainers hijack your happiness. Why are you hijacking their happiness, Saagar? How dare you? Be positive. We're winning. Have a great Saturday night. So, you'll see, most of the hardcore MAGA influencers, they'll come around to something approaching this. A lot of the MAGA faithful, they will stay in line, et cetera. But you're so right about the different buckets.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Hardcore MAGA, They're going to be with Laura Loomer. They're going to figure out a way to rationalize it. It's the Democrats' fault. This was all a trap set up by Barack Obama somehow, some way. And yeah, it must be that the Democrats just like rigged this thing to destroy Trump, or we should just trust him and don't ask too many questions. Most of the MAGA faithful will end up there. And then the people who are sort of more, unaligned, independent, whatever, who were influenced by the Bro podcast and vote based on more or less vibes, I think it'll be significant for them.
I agree.
do.
Yeah.
And I think it will, sow a level of distrust and sort of disappointment in this administration and the direction that it has gone in, because it was such a core article of faith that he would be the guy to, expose the files. And not only is he not doing that, not only is he part of the cover-up, but he looks guilty as hell. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that potentially he is guilty as hell.
Yeah, that's an important trend. Before we get to that, that's such important, and I want to drive it home for everybody, because recently someone was like, well, you speak to MAGA, right? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I was like, no, I don't. And they're like, oh, well, who do you think that you, quote, speak to? And I was like, to the extent that I speak to anybody, it's, on our audience, which if we look at our breakdown is like basically all over the place in terms of politics, and is roughly between the ages of 18 and 45, who I would consider, look, if you're watching the show, you're watching a lot of news and politics. You're probably in the top 5-10% of consumers of news, in the United States, which is great. We're very happy to have you. It makes you a little bit more atypical, but you're more going to be in that independent type category. People are willing to be swayed and look all over the place. And I said, I can only speak to that because I would say that's the only thing I'm an expert in or whatever, to the extent that that even exists. And I think that's a big deal, right? And so that's what I just want to drive home. And look, the Trump administration or the Trump campaign used that audience and really won a lot of them over. I don't think it's deniable, from the 2024 election. So to have them turn against you, especially after you celebrated the podcast election vibes and all, you made all media's dead, etc. Well, then you are now in a position where you are supposed to pay attention. So they're either irrelevant or they're not. And they weren't irrelevant whenever you needed their votes and their platforms and their millions of views, etc. So I would just put it that way. When we talk about politically, and this is like, the MAGA base, there's a lot of confusion. The MAGA base is like a 65-year-old guy in Florida who owns a plumbing business and a boat and with a giant flag on the back, and he'll never let you forget it. That's what the MAGA base is. It's not, that guy at the TPUSA, the Latino guy who maybe was a Democrat 8 years ago, who's now a Republican at a TPUSA event. That's somebody who, I've got a little bit common ground, or at least I know where this person comes from.
Yeah,
I guess,
you could imagine that guy watching
exactly.
the show.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, we're happy to have you. Right, Mister, we're happy to have you.
Last reflection on this, and then we'll get to some of the direct, Trump questions here. You said that you feel like the podcast bros probably feel like they were used.
Yeah.
I hope they do, because they were. They were. Like, Trump knew he could go on there, or J.D. Vance could go on there, or whatever, and they would get just like a friendly hearing, and it would humanize them, and it was just sort of a chill hangout for a few hours, and they wouldn't get any like really tough questions at a time when Trump was being called an extremist and a fascist. This would be a way to be like, look at this guy, he's like hanging out with Rogan, he's hanging out with whoever, Theo Vaughn, whoever. He can't be a fascist, that's preposterous. So they were used, and I hope that there is like some thought that goes into that, because you do, when you have a large platform, I do think that comes with some level of responsibility to, like, this is a person who wants to be in the most powerful position on the planet. Do a little bit of do a little bit of prep. No, you're not Barbara Walters or Jake Tapper or whatever, but you can ask them tough questions.
It can be a balance.
These are smart individuals.
Yeah.
They're not stupid. My personal view is, if you're smart enough to be funny on command, you are an intelligent person.
Totally.
And so if you're going to dabble in that world, bother to do your homework and hold yourself to a standard. So you said, you think next time, if there is a next time, it's going to be a different tenor. And that's a good thing.
I agree.
That is a good thing. So, I hope it's a learning experience, I guess is what I'm saying. Because if you're going to have someone in a position of power or aspiring to a position of power on your platform, you have a significant platform, there is some responsibility, some journalistic responsibility, even if you're not a journalist, is my view. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a grilling for 3 hours or whatever, but some difficult questions with some challenging follow-ups, I think is, a sort of bare minimum that should be ultimately expected here. And the good thing about those platforms is that unlike the MAGA influencer world, where the only reason that some of these people are relevant is because of their sycophancy, because of their like proximity to Trump, these guys don't need Trump.
No, they
got
don't
their
care
own
at all.
audiences.
Right.
They're doing their own thing. There's not the same like level of connect where they have to be on Trump's good side in order to make a living and be funny and have their own audience. So, that creates some possibilities here that I think is a positive.
I have a lot more thoughts on this. It's actually a very interesting conversation. I think 2024 was a very interesting moment in time. It was unique, and it will never happen again. Both because it was almost exclusively a right-wing thing about going on podcasts. There will never be an election again where there's not at least some leading contender, which is not going on. I mean, look at the Buttigieg episode. You'd be an idiot not to go on Flair. Or look at Rokan on Theo Vaughn or any of these other people. You're dumb if you're not doing this. So first of all, there's that. And then second is the tenor of the convo is going to be very different, in my opinion, from going forward. Or maybe I'm, hoping and coping. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.